I'm sure that Carla doesn't need an introduction, but for those who don't know, Dr. Carla Tromans is the Director of International House, and she is going to come up and say a few words about the Peace and Understanding lecture and of course introduce Fred. So please welcome Carla.
It's really lovely to have you all here tonight. This place had a really nice vibe. Fred, we probably need glasses on. I'm old and I need to we'll turn them off a little bit later. But no, really, really pleased to have you all here tonight. I'm going to talk just for a couple of minutes about the history of the Peace and Understanding lecture and then introduce Fred, and then it will be the Fred Smith show. International House first established the Peace and Understanding lectures in 1967. Since that time, they've become both well established and well regarded. The lecture series has hosted respected speakers such as Sir Harry Gibbs, Archbishop Peter Hollingworth, Mr Kevin Rudd, and in 2006, Holocaust survivor Eddie Yacoub. And that was really quite memorable. He's a gentleman of quite some vintage, something like 96 or so, and he was able to talk with an amazing spirit around his life and times being a Holocaust survivor. Each speaker has presented contemporary and pertinent issues of our time. In '68 the theme was Somewhere East of Suez, and if some of you were around in that era, then you would understand the impact of the Suez and the changes there. The 89 lecture was presented by Dr. Ian Lau on internationalism, the environmental imperative, while in 95 the Honourable Justice Michael Kirby's topic was Cambodia. Topics from reconciliation to racism, trade with Asia to partnerships in the Pacific, and brotherhood to multicultural melting pots, the Peace and Understanding lecture series has consistently provided topics to inspire us, challenge our thinking, and open our understanding of global and local issues. The International House is a multicultural college, and for those that don't know, we've got about 40 different nationalities and 240 young people living here at one time, and draws into one community students from dozens of different nations and cultures. Our vision is to create a global community of connected, capable and compassionate young leaders. It is with vision in mind we see the Peace and Understanding lecture series as a cornerstone event reflecting our firm commitment to international and cross-cultural peace and understanding. Welcome, folks. This year, with so many countries at war and in crisis, we invited Fred to speak about his experiences in the war zone as an Australian diplomat. Introduction to Fred. Fred Smith is an Australian diplomat, songwriter and performer who has spent the last 20 years working on Australian stabilisation missions in Afghanistan and the South Pacific, touring America and travelling the Australian festival circuit. Kind of a nice mix, and you'll get a taste of that tonight. Fred was the first Australian diplomat to be posted to Uruzgan in July of 2009 and the last to leave in 2013. He is the subject of the film Bougainville Sky, about his time in the war-torn islands of the South Pacific, where his work as a musician, peace monitor and radio broadcaster contributed to the success of the world's first unarmed peacekeeping force. More recently, his work in Afghanistan was the subject of the ABC Australian Story feature, A Sapper's Lullaby. Fred has released 8 CDs with 2 winning National Film and Sound Archive Awards. At the 2015 Australian Political Studies Association Annual Awards, he won the Conference Organisers Award for his unusual grassroots approach to explaining Australia's involvement in stabilisation operations in Afghanistan and the South Pacific to the public. When I first saw Fred on the Australian Story, when I saw that, I was just so amazed at not just about the content of what Fred was talking about, but the way in which he conducted himself. And it was really sort of quite a unique approach. And I thought nothing of it until we ran into each other at another function, probably a year or so later, and of course being a little bit brazen, I ran and said, I'm Director of International House and Residential College at the University of Queensland. Do you ever come to Brisbane? Blah, blah, blah. And Fred said, oh, yes, I had an experience of residential life. It's good start. Understanding yes, I would be really delighted to come, come to International House when I'm next, or when I am in Brisbane. And so, eventually all the pieces came together in the jigsaw puzzle, and I think it's probably 2 or 3 years on. Fred is with us tonight, so would you please give him a really, really warm welcome.
In Uruzgan province, I'm here to study the musical comedy tradition of the Taliban.
I can understand why diplomacy.
Well, thanks very much, Carl. I'm very pleased to be here to talk today about this topic, peace and understanding in conflict zones. It was quite high up here. Conflict zones. Diplomats as sort of stuffed shirts drinking cocktails in Geneva and New York, and that is certainly part of the work. But we're also in some very gritty locations doing difficult work. When the bomb goes off in Bali, we're going through the body bags. When someone gets kidnapped in the Philippines, we're negotiating a release.
Today we gather on the 44th anniversary of the Battle of Long-Tan.
In Afghanistan, they wanted to hold a commemorative ceremony for Long-Tan, but of course it's a bit hard to get a good bugle player that far downrange. And so the night before, the Sergeant Major came in and said, "Fred, you know how to play Last Post and Reveille on the harmonica?" I said, "Don't know, but I'll look it up." I looked it up on the internet and got the notes and played it the next morning on the harp at that ceremony.
As a ethnomusicologist here in Uruzgan province, I'm here to study the musical comedy tradition of the Taliban.
I can understand why diplomacy.
Levels. And just as that competition reaches toxic levels, the mechanisms inbuilt in the society for dealing with that competition have become degraded. The justice system fails. The political system falls apart. And these mechanisms are absent for solving problems peacefully, and war sets in. But of course the third reason it's difficult to get these things right is these environments, these conflict zones we find ourselves in, are usually inherently foreign to us. They're countries that we have not grown up in, and complexities that we do not understand very often. And what we've learned from many years of these peacekeeping interventions is that if we don't understand the culture and the complexity, then we're going to mess it up. Hence the topic for today, which is understanding in conflict zones. And that's the key word for me, is understanding. So it's a big and important topic, I think. But since the doors are locked and you're all sitting quietly, I'm going to tell you a bit about myself. 1989, October that year, I was sitting as much as you are after dinner in a residential college of a university. The University of Western Australia, in my case. October, exams approaching, and I was stressed. I was also stressed because I was having an existential crisis. I wasn't enjoying the course I was doing, like most artistic, creative types. I was studying commerce and law. Like a lot of you students here, I didn't know what I wanted to do in my life. The following year, 1990, I got hold of a little stretch of jelly rubber, 2 shoelaces and a knee brace, and I built a device that could fire a water bomb accurately over 80 metres. That would have been your nightmare, Carla. This piece of ingenuity earned me legendary status in the college, and the following year I was elected as the college club president. It was a presidential campaign on a level of inanity that you'd only now call Trumpian. I'm not proud of it, but then again, back then, firing water bombs accurately mattered. 6 years later, I graduated. I took the slow. It was comfortable, all right? I graduated. I did finish it. And entered into a competitive process to join the Foreign Affairs Department. Was selected amongst 30 people that year from a field of about 3,000 into the graduate recruitment round at the Foreign Affairs Department, and they set me to work in my first rotation on the South Asia desk, responsible inter alia for disputes in Sri Lanka, Kashmir and Afghanistan, thank you very much, most of which we judged at the time to be intractable, and so they seem. I mean, Afghanistan in particular has never been that cosy. I guess it can be hard to understand from Australia. You know, we've had a reasonably functional governments for the last 227 years, give or take Campbell Newman. And of course we're on a continent, so anyone who wants to invade us is going to get wet. Afghanistan, on the other hand, has suffered the rough end of geography's pineapple at pretty much every opportunity. Located there on the crossroads of Central Asia on the trade and migration routes between China, India, Persia, the Mediterranean, has left Afghanistan an ethnic patchwork, much like Logan. With 9 different major tribal groups, each with a dozen sub-tribes competing with one another for control of land, power and resources. Not only has it left it a patchwork, but also has it meant that Afghanistan has been susceptible to the odd invasion. Things were going pretty well in Afghanistan in the 60s and 70s actually. They had quite a modern culture. Until in 1979 the Russians invaded and things got very untidy very quickly. The Russians dominated the cities. Well, not entirely unconstructive, they in for educating women, for example. But the countryside was harder to take. The Russians fought hard against CIA-sponsored mujahideen and eventually lost about 30,000 men in Afghanistan until in 1989 they eventually withdrew. Now, when they withdrew, people in the West celebrated this as a victory for democracy, but it really burst open the gates of hell and let the war dogs slip. There was a power vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum, and in a power vacuum in a country you get warlords, and the warlords representing different tribes of Afghanistan slugged it out with one another for control of the country and for the capital, Kabul, destroying Kabul in the process pretty much. People in Kabul and around the country were sick of this chaos, and so when the Taliban swept into Kabul in 1996 in the back of Toyota Hiluxes, people welcomed them, thinking that at least they promised some law and order, albeit based on a more extreme interpretation of the Islamic faith than most Afghans are comfortable with. And the Taliban dominated most of Afghanistan for the following 5 years, all but the northern 10%, which was held by a militia called the Northern Alliance, led by a charismatic warlord named Shah Ahmed Massoud. So that was 1996 in Afghanistan. 1996 I had my own little civil war. I started writing songs, and I was torn between a promising career as a diplomat and an unpromising career as a folk singer. I was drawn to the latter option, notwithstanding I'd only written 2 songs. One was a drinking song that seemed to be popular at the local pub, and the other was a political song called Open Country. So I had a dilemma which to pursue. Every time I reached a fork in the road, I just kept going over the railing to the nature strip. You know, I proceeded through a very sophisticated process of indecision to sort of set up 2 careers, which in many ways conflicted. You know, I mean, as a songwriter, it's all about self-expression and abandoned creativity. As a bureaucrat, it's all about prudence, patience, and due process. As a songwriter, you succeed by getting media attention. As a bureaucrat, you fail if you get media attention. You know, my life didn't make sense, really. And in 1998, I put out an album called Soapbox. By 1999, I was broke and it was time to get a real job. So, fortunately, I had the Foreign Affairs thing still going. And this is how I came to be in Bougainville Island. By way of general background, you know, we live here in the Asia Pacific as Australians, and that presents an enormous range of opportunities, but it brings responsibilities to the region we live in. Is particularly susceptible to natural disaster, but also with its ethnic complexities, its weak governance, evolving political system, it is susceptible. Bougainvillians have a profoundly black-skinned pigmentation. They're the blackest coloured people in the world. So they refer to the people on mainland Papua New Guinea as the Redskins, whereas the people in mainland Papua New Guinea refer to the Bougainvilleans in Pidgin as Osem Aspelong Sospen. It was never going to be pretty. So in 1914, Germany became unfashionable. And we took over Papua New Guinea as a trust territory and ran it as such until 1975, when we granted Papua New Guinea independence. Now, at the time, many in Bougainville wanted independence from Papua New Guinea. It didn't happen. And around the same time, a huge copper mine opened up operations in Bougainville Island called the Panguna Copper Mine. It produced enormous wealth, a third of the world's copper trade. Tax royalties from it were 40% of the Papua New Guinea government's tax revenue. And it brought modern life to Bougainville in some positive ways. But it brought problems too. They dug a hole in the ground there so big that you can see it from the moon. Apparently they've never been. And of course, in order to do this, they displaced landowners. Now, land ownership in Bougainville is complex. It's essentially owned by women, but there are tertiary and secondary rights that go to men. And it's a complex thing that we could never really understand. But the bottom line is, if you displace Bougainvilleans from the land that they own, you get trouble. And of course, the copper sulfate turned the rivers blue in a culture where they drink their water from the rivers. And this gave rise to grievances felt by landowners, and they tried to seek compensation and solutions to their grievances through formal systems, court systems, etc. But it didn't work out, and eventually they got frustrated and they got belligerent. And in the middle of 1989, a handful of these disgruntled landowners stole some TNT from the mine storeroom and blew up a power pylon. The mine worker was killed, and a curfew was imposed, but eventually CRA Mining Company shut the mine down, they thought temporarily. The Papua New Guinea government started to lose royalty money and panicked. They sent in the Papua New Guinea Defence Forces, not known at the best of times for their subtlety. It's well known that they committed a range of human rights abuses in this situation, and of course women were often bore the brunt of these abuses, as often happens in these chaotic situations. And this gave rise to an organisation called the Bougainville Revolutionary Army. And I'm going to sing you now a song that I wrote from the point of view of one of these BRA soldiers. When they came to take me in, we were hiding on the hilltops. From my village down below, smell the burning, hear the gunshots. My house I can rebuild when it's time to start a new life. But what they did to my wife, 'cause it seems now to me now that when she cries oceans, she finds ways to hide. When she bleeds roses, she bleeds all inside. So we followed that platoon, and we waited in the big bush. Later on one afternoon, we caught them in an ambush. I got that corporal in my sights, put a bullet through his forehead. But even now that he's dead, no such thing as revenge, because when she cries oceans, she finds ways to hide. When she bleeds roses, she bleeds all inside the sight. When she cries oceans, she finds ways to hide. When she bleeds roses, she bleeds all inside. sun in her eyes, constant and persistent. Even lying between her thighs, she's somewhere in the distance. Friend, you say we won the war. I'm telling you, that depends. 'Cause for her it never ends. 'Cause it seems now, to me now, that when she cries oceans, she finds ways to hide. When she bleeds roses, she bleeds on side to side. When she cries oceans, she finds ways to hide. When she bleeds roses, she bleeds on side. Perhaps the point of that story and that song is goes some way to explain how these civil wars start. People have grievances that are not resolved, either by the justice system or the political system. They become frustrated and they resort to violence. It is not to justify it, because in the end it never works out. It never really helps anything. It tends to spiral out of control, and that's pretty much what happened in Bougainville. As the Australian academic Ted Wolfe has described it, the resulting collapse of government services and authority on the ground meant the situation bore an increasing resemblance to that described by the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes. A war of everyone against everyone. Fear of others, together with long-standing enmities, rivalries and other sources of tension, meant individuals and small groups became engaged in violent conflict against other individuals and small groups. From 1989 onwards. And in 1996, things were looking no better. I thought it was all going to keep going, but it was a remarkable turn of events. The Papua New Guinea government decided to try and hire a band of mercenaries from the Sandmine Company. Do you remember the Sandmine bit? Australia and New Zealand got so appalled by this that we kind of sparked into action and it triggered a peace process. And it began with the Kiwis, the New Zealanders. They flew 3 of their Air Force Hercules, one to pick up the New Guinea government officials, one to pick up the New Guinea Defence Force, and one to pick up the Bougainville rebels, and they flew them back to an army camp in Burnham, New Zealand, chucked them armed into a gymnasium and said, come out when you've got a solution. And they emerged 2 weeks later with the Burnham Truce, which was the beginning of a peace process that worked. After that, there was no return to fighting. Trust and communication improved between the protagonists, and solutions were negotiated to the political problems. And they invited Australia and New Zealand to send a peace monitoring group to the island on the condition that we come unarmed, which completely freaked out the Australian Defence Force. But we agreed to do it, and you know what? It worked. Partly because we were armed. It meant the direct responsibility for our security was with the Bougainville rebels, and they took that responsibility seriously. Not a single peacekeeper was killed in 5 years. But the other reason it worked is because of that word understanding. We understood many things that we needed to understand. The first thing we understood was that we as Australia were not trusted. We'd been involved in the mine and supported the Papua New Guinea Defence Forces, so we knew that we couldn't lead the peace process, so we let the Kiwis do it. We knew we weren't trusted, so we agreed to come unarmed. We knew we weren't trusted, so we wore these ugly yellow t-shirts so people could see us. A fashion mistake, but it wasn't camouflage. That was the key thing. The other thing we understood is that we couldn't understand everything, so we got Vanuatu police, Fijian army soldiers to come. They'd grown up in village life, they could see what was going on in the village. You know, you and I walk into a village, we only see 20% of what's going on. Someone who's grown up in that culture sees everything. We knew that women were a critical constituency for peace, so we sent female peacemakers, along with soldiers and civilians like me. We understood we couldn't impose the political solutions, that if they weren't homegrown, they wouldn't last. And so we let the Bougainvilleans run their own peace process, their own agenda, their own timetable. We just provided security and logistical support. And they ended up hammering out a peace agreement that worked. We understood it was not to rush the disarmament of peace. We understood that people hold their weapons if they are fearful. We understood that the late 90s was too early for disarmament, but once the agreement was signed in 2001, we understood it was time to help out with disarmament. And we did it at the right time because we understood the time was ready, and we collected 3,000 weapons. We understood that there were traditional mechanisms for reconciliation that could heal on a local level the fractures in Bougainville society, the distrust, the urgency for revenge, all those things that come with a bitter civil war. We understood the need for information in a culture based on rumours, so we put out a newsletter every week called News Belong Peace. We understood sport and social engagement were a good way to get in touch with the Bougainvilleans, and so we got amongst it on the soccer field, on the volleyball courts. And we understood the power of music, or rather we stumbled onto it. You know, I was sent there to monitor the peace and report, but really I'm just an extrovert looking for a stage. And I had my guitar, and I started playing out of the patrol base in Surikatau, and suddenly all these kids would gather around me, and the patrol commander, a smart young Australian captain, saw potential in this. And so he set up a thing called the Bulmakau Patrol, that spill out into a village. Me, Vance Copper, engineering sergeant, Aussie corporal. We'd set up under a tree and I'd start singing in pidgin. And the soldiers were doing the backing vocals, which they hated. And people would gather round. You don't need an excuse to be in a village if you've got a guitar. The young people would sit down the front, the old people at the back. And I thought, well, this is an opportunity to communicate messages. So I wrote a couple of songs, including one about the cycle of violence, and I'd introduce it by looking at one of the kids down the front and I'd say, okay, picking, suppose you've got one Palamani come on village belong you, which is pidgin for saying to someone from your village. But just Palamani, we've got bell hot, hot belly, anger. We've got bell hot one time, Palamani come on another village, he's angry at a guy from another village. Well, see, we've got a bite of man on that other village, so he goes and hits the guy in the village. Why, you're looking for something come on now, see what happens now. Or look at the man belong out of village, come on village belong you, now bite the man belong village belong you. Everyone from the other village comes and hits the guy in your village. So you look and watch him dispel something, you go around, see how long goes round. The kid down the front looked up at me and his eyes would glaze. His jaw would drop and he'd think to himself, who is this patronising? And then I'd sing a song called Mr. Circle, which talked about the cycle of violence in pidgin. I don't have time to play it now. It was not the only song I wrote. It was a thoughtful song with a message, but I wrote some less reflective material too, as I wanted to, including a composition which has become moderately famous in Bougainville called M Now Bulmakau. M Now is pidgin for yes indeed. Bulmakau is pidgin for cow. It was data reggae, it meant nothing, but it became something around the island. We released 20,000 songs of peace cassettes, and this song was the one that spread, and peace monitors could drive through a village and call out from the four-wheel drive, "M now!" and all the kiddies would cry, "Bulmakau!"
We couldn't coerce anyone to do anything. We had to work with the people and their great will for peace. Ultimately, it was a psychological process. How do you persuade a guy in a village he doesn't need his weapon anymore when he knows the guy in the next village has got one? It's a confidence. He has to believe in the peace process. And there's a sense in which just our presence there, just the fact that we've been there, made a difference to them. So it became very much a matter of learning how to be there in a way that was meaningful, made an impact. Patrol called the Bulmakau Patrol. We'd all spill into a four-wheel drive and head out to a village.
It seems to be becoming a common phrase. It's enemy scars. You call it Bulmacao. Why do you want to call yourself Macau, right? Right up to this day, none of the little kids have seen the Bulmacao or the kid on the cows. And this suddenly makes it really funny, yeah?
PMT, Sir Bonita. Mr. Greg Smith, nagkaroon pala ng influence. Ako yung anong multahan ng radio po Edwin. Kaya siya nagkakunas na Bulmacao.
That's Bougainville. It was a remarkable experience. Those who go know the place love it. Volker, for example, has done some excellent research commissioning perceptions, to understand perception about why the peace process worked, and confirmed a lot of what I've been thinking and saying. Music was an important part of that connection. I've got to move on from Bougainville now. Are you all sitting comfortably? Do you need to stand up and wiggle around? Got it? Okay. So I came back in 2001 from Bougainville and released an album called Boga Up Empires for sale. Megan's got it over there. And I was about to launch it in September of 2001 when the world turned on its head. And the problems seemed to originate in Afghanistan. On the 9th of September 2001, Northern Alliance leader Shah Ahmed Massoud accepted a request for an interview from two journalists who claimed to be from the Al Jazeera network. When they showed up, they turned out to be terrorists from the Al-Qaeda network, and the camera they carried turned out to be a bomb. Massoud was killed, and 2 days later, the event that he had long predicted, an attack on the Western world by Al-Qaeda, trained in Afghanistan on the Western world, took place, changing things forever. 8 days after that, John Howard invoked the ANZUS alliance, and we sent Australian Special Forces in with the US and British Special Forces to fight alongside the Northern Alliance to drive the Taliban out of Afghanistan. In the following months, talks were held in Bonn, Germany, that resulted in a democratic government being set up, and the Taliban vanished. No one loved them anyway. And things were looking good for a while there. In 2003, George Bush got the notion to invade Iraq. I've got to say, I thought this was a dumb idea at the time, and was involved in protests against it on the lawns of Parliament House. I'm wearing that stupid green hat because my dad was Secretary of Defence at the time. It was awkward for me. Did they listen to me? No, they bloody went in. And things got complicated quickly. Many mistakes were made. The two most acknowledged mistakes were the de-Baathification of Iraq's bureaucracy and the demilitarisation of the Iraqi army. Basically, in the Iraq bureaucracy as it was populated by party members from Hussein's Ba'ath Party. The Americans were very focused on punishing the enemy. They identified the Ba'athists as the enemy, and they cleared the bureaucracy of all Ba'ath Party members. Of course, there were a lot of men in there with real capacity, and so they really crippled the Iraq bureaucracy for the critical work of rebuilding the country. The second mistake was in the same vein. They demilitarised, they demobilised the Iraqi army. 100,000 armed men, all of a sudden unemployed. What could go wrong? And of course, many people from that army are now leaders in ISIS. Basic failure to understand the politics of the situation, leading to fatal mistakes. And we got caught up in Iraq in ways that you'll be very aware of. And the other effect of that, of course, was it distracted our attention from Afghanistan. And the Taliban crept back in from Pakistan, where they were hidden and protected by the Pakistan intelligence services, and started to take over provinces in the east and the south of the country. So it was that in 2006, the international community was called on to send in more troops. The US stationed troops in most of the 34 provinces of Afghanistan, but other provinces were taken over by particular countries as part of a sensible enough international division of labour. The Brits, for example, went to Helmand, the Canadians to Kandahar, the Germans up to Kunduz, the Kiwis went to Bamiyan province, and the Dutch took on an obscure little province in the south of Afghanistan called Uruzgan. We asked NATO what they wanted us to do. They said, go and help the Dutch in Uruzgan. We said, we don't want to bloody go to Uruzgan. Oh, we'll be there, where is it? It turns out it was just north of Kandahar, just east of Helmand province, and so we sent troops there, about 300 initially, but subsequently a few more to support the Dutch. Now, Uruzgan province was obscure and a small province in Afghanistan, not very well known even amongst Afghans, but it had some complicated history. In 2002, when President Karzai came to power in Afghanistan, he was from the Popolzai sub-tribe of Pashtuns, and so he appointed the Uruzgan warlord from the same tribe, the Popolzai tribe, Jan Muhammad Khan, as governor. And so it was natural for the US Special Forces to work with the provincial governor from the Popolzai tribe and subsequently with his henchman, Matiullah Khan. Now, being Special Forces soldiers, what they're trained to do is identify the enemy and kill the enemy. And so the question was, who is the enemy? And of course, Jan Muhammad Khan was happy to oblige with examples. Mainly amongst them were his tribal rivals. What do you know? And of course those rivals found themselves being pursued and needed help. Where do you think they went for help? So in 2006, security in Uruzgan province, the capital, but anywhere out to the east or the north, was Taliban country. And that's when the Dutch took over. And when they showed up in 2006, they did an unusual thing. They did some research. And the research discovered that the reason why the tribes to the north and the east were supporting the Taliban was that they were afraid of the governor and needed protection. And so the Dutch took on what they called a tribal balance policy. They engaged with the tribes beyond the Popolzai and the Baraksai in particular, and their leader Muhammad Daoud Khan. So that was 2006, and the Dutch mission rolled on side by side in competing political strategies with the American mission until about 2009, when the ISAF strategy changed, ISAF, International Security Assistance Force, to what they called counterinsurgency, which was a new strategy based on a recognition that pursuing the enemy was not going to win the war. We needed to actually protect the population. That became the focus, and we came to realise that political solutions were needed. So countries started to send in diplomats to work alongside our soldiers. And in April of 2009, Kevin Rudd announced that Australia would be sending diplomats to work in Uruzgan province. I was working at DFAT at the time, or rather I was asleep at my desk on a Thursday afternoon, when I got a tap on the shoulder. And 2 months later, I rocked up in Uruzgan province. You understand, I'm a musician, I don't just go places, I rock up. The first thing I discovered was it was just incredibly dusty. Everything was covered in dust. The dust struck me as a metaphor for the opaqueness of the society. There's an Afghan expert called Barbara Stapleton who describes working in Afghanistan as a process of removing layers of blindfolds. The first thing I knew about Afghanistan was that I didn't know what was going on. And so a diplomat's first response to a situation is to try and comprehend. Now, of course, you can talk to one person, get one perspective, but that's likely to be the perspective they want you to have. So the only way to do it is to talk to many people, to gather many perspectives. And that's what I did. The Dutch, I've got to say, did a pretty good job of hiring cultural advisors, Afghan expatriates, museum workers. One of them was a Dutchman named Willem, an Afghan expert who was a young terror reading now my book, the Dutch had written a book. An Afghan expert who was a young terrorist in the 1980s. He travelled to Afghanistan and spent time with Mujahideen. He wore spectacles and had a mop of silver hair, cut Beatles style, circa 1964. He got around base in sandals and socks. The Dutch soldiers referred to him effectively as Geiten woolen sokkendrager. Dutch for wearer of goat hair socks. Dutchman. He said, when I was in Afghanistan in 1984, the population was 15 million, and now 32 million. So pressure on land and water is very tight, and feeding people is a struggle. Land ownership, he said, had been forever contested, but had been further unsettled by the coming and going of regimes over the decades. Localised competition for land and water was a bigger influence on Uyghur-Afghan dynamics than the struggle with the Taliban. He concluded, we can't play God, but we can understand our role in the ecosystem. We are seen by Afghans as a source of power and resources in their competition with one another. We need to be aware of this so as not to be manipulated. Understanding in a context where you're constantly removing layers of blindfold. So, a highly competitive society with a lot of nastiness going on, but at the same time the Afghans, I've got to say, are a very courteous bunch. You know, in a society like that you need to be able to deal with your enemies, but you're going to need friends too. And Afghans are immensely likeable people. Hospitality is a big part of Afghan culture. Courtesy, enormously important. If you meet an Afghan friend in the street, the kiss on both cheeks, the salam alaikums, salutations that go on for 5 or 6 minutes. How's your brother? How's your dog? How's your dad? On it goes, both ways, before the conversation can really start. If you're trying to get through a doorway with an Afghan friend, it can take a week after you. This was actually observed in the 19th century by the Brigadier Colin Mackenzie, part of the invading force from Britain that invaded in 1838, who said, while he was held in prison in Kabul by an Afghan warlord, he wrote, "The Afghans are an extremely hardy, bold, independent race. Intelligent with a ready fund of conversation and pleasantry which renders them agreeable companions. Afghan gentlemen are extremely sensitive to courtesy, having excellent manners themselves." I worked over there with a US agriculture officer called Bob Mullen, who put it equally eloquently, but a little more economically, when he said, "I love the Afghans, they're great people, except the ones that are trying to kill you." I really got to know the Afghans working through the interpreters, generally young men who'd come down from Kabul, just trying to make enough money to get married and find their way in the world. And, you know, they were like young guys from anywhere, just looking for a bit of release. They used to put on little concerts down at PRT House. You know, they'd come down. I'd try to set a good example for them. So you do what you can. The Foreign Affairs Department hasn't seen this footage. So eventually, the Dutch were about to leave, and I took to working up at a forward operating base 40 kilometres north of Tarankout, doing the political work in the lead up to the elections in September of 2010. Out of forward operating base Mearwise, it was a very blokey environment populated with guys from the Nogra barracks, a beautiful valley, but competitive and toxic politics. The district chief, Mohammed Dawood Khan, he was a mate of mine. We'd go out and talk to the villagers every day. He was supported by a handful of local chiefs, but not others. Fat Sadiq was one of his enemies, for example. So very primitive in a lot of ways. It looks like the 14th century, you know, dusty streets, donkeys, all that. But in other ways, it was the 21st century. People had solar panels, and satellite discs, mobile phones, and the internet, which in many ways is a good thing. The lights were turned on in Afghanistan. People were seeing the wider world. But it did present problems for us, particularly in early September of 2010, when a pastor, a priest in Gainesville, Florida, with a congregation of 60, decided to host his own international Burn the Quran Day. Word of this got up to forward operating base Mearwise and to the Chora Valley. And one morning, 1,000 Afghans converged on the base in a very bad mood. It was terrifying. It was biblical. They started throwing rocks. Eventually the Afghan soldiers got frightened and started opening up Beirut